Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Let's Not Meet. This time we've got a couple stories from subscribers like you. If you'd like to send in your own story, you can hit me up at gmail.com. That is not how emails work. You can hit me up at qsubs@gmail.com. That's CUESUBS@gmail.com. Let's get into the stories. This story comes from Tom Sawyer and her cousin Huckleberry Finn. Right off the bat, let me say that we were young and incredibly stupid. This was a couple years back, so I was 16 and she was 14, both of us female. Neither of us had phones, just iPod Touches, although we didn't have them with us when this all went down, that don't really do much if you don't have Wi-Fi. It was October and it got dark fairly early. I can't remember why, but she was at my house, and my parents and siblings weren't home. I live out in the country, with my only neighbor being my uncle who periodically lived in another state in his cabin. At around 5 p.m., we get hungry and wanted food. Nobody's home, I can't legally drive us, so we decide to get on my four-wheeler and cruise the 10 miles to a gas station. I had done this often, and I still do. Even now that I have my license, I like driving my four-wheeler over there. It's just beginning to get a bit dark, but I figure we can easily get there and back before the sun sets. A very stupid idea. My four-wheeler isn't a big one and can barely fit the two of us comfortably, yet we could not be deterred. So with a pocket filled with money, I jump on my ride and wait for my cousin to get on behind me. Because I live on a farm, I'm that classic country girl. I carry a pocket knife religiously. And not just some cheap $5 knife from Walmart. I mean, I've got a $200 knife with me on the daily. My cousin, who I'll call Huckleberry Finn, lived in Wyoming on a ranch. She was in my state visiting family. She also carries a knife. We get around halfway to the gas station before I realize something's gone horribly wrong. My four-wheeler is out of gas. For Huckleberry's sake, I do try to make light out of the situation, joking around, saying all hope is lost, just messing around with her. I couldn't even get my four-wheeler to start at this point, so I get off and tell her to do the same. We weren't wearing helmets or any sort of gear. Not relevant to the story, I just want to tell you how stupid we were. I, being the oldest and arguably the wisest, come to the conclusion that we'll just push my four-wheeler back to my property. My family has a lot of property, unfortunately we weren't anywhere near it. My four-wheeler is sorta on the smaller side, so long as it's in neutral, it's an easy push. We didn't get far on that dusty old dirt road when a beat-up old car came flying by us. This guy didn't even slow down, just roared down the road. Huckleberry says something along the lines of, he could have asked if we needed help, and my heart sank when her wish came true. I'd always been weary of strangers, especially out here. Unless my dad knew them, I wasn't one for being polite out in the country. I saw his brake lights go on, and immediately this feeling of dread washed over me. A part of my mind told me he could just be coming back to help, but part of me didn't believe it, and I'm glad for that part of me. When I saw the car begin to turn back around, I tell Huckleberry to get out her knife and sit on the bike. She did so in a hurry, and I remember noticing her face had gone white. My hands shook as I pulled out my own knife, keeping it hidden just in case this was a friendly guy. I had this wild urge to protect Huckleberry at all costs, that I clearly remember thinking that if this guy comes at us, I'd hold him off to give her a chance to run. This was back in my more depressive days, and in that moment, I thought that if I lived, I'd never want to end my life again. The guy came to a stop about 10 feet from my bike, getting out of a car and plodding on over to us. "Hello," I greeted him first, trying to judge what was about to happen. He stopped, probably 6+ feet tall, 200 pounds, and no hair. He just stared. And then he just growled out, "You girls need help." I immediately shook my head, stuttering out a lie on the spot. "No, we're just waiting for the bike to cool down." He stopped looking at me and looked at Huckleberry. "What about you? You want a ride?" he said again with that same gravelly voice. Huckleberry shook her head, gesturing to me and responding quickly. "No, thank you. Sawyer's taking me home." The big man looked around and, to my absolute horror, took a couple steps closer. I pulled out my knife on the spot, probably holding it incorrectly, and just pointed it at him. Huckleberry didn't do anything with hers. He stared a few seconds more and then went back into his car, not leaving, just sitting in his car. After another failed start with my four-wheeler, I tell Huckleberry to follow me and that we're going to enter the cornfield beside us. At this point, my entire body was shaking and my heart nearly pounding out of my chest. My four-wheeler meant nothing to me if it meant getting myself and my cousin out of this situation safely. She nodded, getting off my bike, taking my hand that wasn't holding the knife, and we probably looked terrifying entering that cornfield. It wasn't until I heard his car door creak open that I began to run, dragging Huckleberry behind me. It's very hard to actually run while between rows of corn, but I feel like we did our best, moving to different rows, all of that stuff, until I figured we should probably stop making noise. We stayed crouched in that muggy, dusty field, surrounded by bugs, for at least an hour. I couldn't hear a thing other than buzzing and our own ragged breathing. After that hour passed, I got up and led us as quietly as possible across the field towards the opposite side of where I had left my bike. We got out, saw nobody, and took off running for home. I can't remember what time we actually got home, but it was pitch black and my mother still wasn't there. I'd missed a dozen texts from her though. I called my dad and my mom, told them what happened, locked all the doors, kept close watch on the driveway until my parents got home. That very night, my dad went back to where I had left my four-wheeler. It, thankfully, was still there. He also found a set of men's footprints leading right up to the field that we ran through. He never actually entered, just stood at the end. To this day, I don't know what he wanted or what he would have done if I hadn't have pulled my knife, but I still get shivers thinking about it. Huckleberry refuses to go to the gas station via four-wheeler anymore. I don't blame her. It took me 5 months to even drive that way again. Her parents still haven't forgiven me. I pray I never meet that same man or anyone like him ever again. I think the thing that freaks me out the most about this, other than maybe the ambiguity of this man's intentions, is the isolation of the situation, because she said that the gas station was 10 miles away, and they were just halfway there when they ran out of gas. That means they were 5 miles from home when this was all going down, with like nobody around at all. It just freaks me out. This next story doesn't necessarily involve sexual assault. It's kind of vague, but it involves themes that may be bothersome to somebody who has experienced that, so beware. This story comes to us from an anonymous subscriber. So this starts out with an unfortunate incident that I don't really like to admit. When I was in 7th grade, I had my first and only hookup. Nothing major happened, but it was enough to make me realize that I didn't want to be involved in that kind of thing, and was a pretty huge prude from that point on. The guy this involved, his friend, my friend, and I had all grown up in the same neighborhood, but I moved to a different neighborhood a few years before, and didn't know the guys as well as she did. I'm hanging out with my friend Kate at her house, and she says, "Hey, let's hang out with Caleb and Luke." I agree, and we go to Luke's house where Caleb was also hanging out. We get there, nothing weird at first, and Kate says, "Hey, Caleb thinks you're really cute." This is a point in my life where I was very desperate for the approval of others. I was not popular and not many guys had ever been interested in me, so I was very excited about this. Caleb was on the varsity football team, which I was a cheerleader for, and he was also admittedly attractive. I couldn't believe he was interested in me, and it clouded my already 13-year-old level judgment. We all go upstairs, and this is where things got weird. The guys literally started putting on porn and watching it in front of us, like literal DVDs. I was a little weirded out, but again, I had no experience with guys, and it didn't bother me as much as it should have. I was so desperate to prove to this guy that I was cool, so I said nothing. A few minutes later, someone suggested that we play 7 Minutes in Heaven, and of course, I got paired up with Caleb. Kate knew my bad luck with guys, and I think she had good intentions, but this was definitely not the right way to go about things. So we go into the bathroom, and small things happen, by normal people's standards, I guess. Then we come out. I was very naive and knew next to nothing about anything sexual. It was a rude awakening, and I wanted no part of it again. We didn't stay long after that. Nothing ever developed further between Caleb and I was glad. Fast forward to sophomore year of high school. I had completely forgotten about him. I was a totally different person at this point. Super goth, career-oriented as a budding opera singer, and very anti-relationship because I saw it as distracting from my goals. That day with Caleb had some very negative, lasting effects on me where sex was concerned, and I'd become very afraid of it and ultra protective of my virginity and innocence. I was not prepared for what I encountered that day, and it messed me up to a point where I couldn't even say the word sex out loud until I was married and pregnant with my first child. Anyway, I'm 16 at this point and just chilling in my room. I suddenly get this mysterious text from an unknown number. "Hey, sexy." I asked who it was, and he says, "I'll give you a hint. We had sex." I informed him that that was impossible because I was a virgin, so he must have the wrong number. He says, "Well, we almost did." I said again that I'd never even almost have sex with anyone. As naive as I was at 13, I would have never let it go that far. So he finally says, "It's Caleb. Don't you remember me? We hooked up." The memories come flooding back. I started to freak out. He says something along the lines of wanting to hook up again and started saying really gross things that were really triggering. Now, I admit I was on a bit of a high horse about my modesty because I would not be taken advantage of again and was proud to have my priorities straight. I lost my temper. I told him, "How dare you think I'd do that with you? Leave me alone, you a-hole." And a few other things I kind of regret. That didn't go well. He lost it and started screaming over text about what a stuck-up bitch I was. Then he says the kicker. "Whatever, I know where you live. I could come and kill you if I want." I freaked out and immediately called my dad crying. He came home from work and we called the police. They went and talked to him, but ultimately did nothing. I got lucky in the fact that it scared him off and I haven't heard from him since. Our school was enormous, so we never saw each other either. But it could have just angered him more and something truly terrible could have happened. I really lost faith in the police that day and have had multiple other instances where I was not protected while in danger after that. Guys see my modesty as a challenge, their words, and it unfortunately makes me a frequent target. But yeah, to the slimy kid who thought it was okay to ask for a hookup after 3 years of total silence then threaten my life, let's never meet again. I'm not sure exactly what the extent of what Caleb did wrong the night of the 7 minutes in heaven. I don't know if there was any, lack of consent or if it was just something that you agreed to at the time that wasn't okay, but it sounds like it affected you deeply, and I can't imagine the mindset of calling somebody up and saying those things to them after 3 years. It's just extremely strange. It's not even a booty call, "Hey, you want to meet up?" or something like that. The way that he worded it is just so deeply creepy, and it really just leaves me very unsettled. I'm glad that nothing came of it, and I'm glad you're in, a happy relationship now. Hey, I hope that you guys are all doing well and staying safe out there, taking care of yourselves and the people around you, skating on to the best of your abilities, and drinking more water. I'll see you very soon, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day.